Welcome, Taylor Elyse Morrison. I have to tell you that when I first was conceptualizing this show, you were the first number one on my list. And that's not just because I have wanted to interview you for a while, but it's also just because I think that your work is so rich, so grounded, and if I may be so bold, so right for right now. So welcome to the show. I'm thrilled that you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here and that I was one of the people that you had in mind. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, like back in the early days, not knowing anything about your background whatsoever, I just remember somehow, algorithmically getting involved into some of the content that you were putting out there and understanding that you were using a lens on self-care that at the time was very, very new. I think it's a little bit more normalized to think of self-care out of the realm of just jade rollers and bubble baths now. But I remember getting your emails and just feeling compelled to write back and say, hey, you're doing a great job. Like, keep going. I just want you to know that someone sees you, not knowing anything about anything else that was going on. But I just really appreciate the almost like pioneerism of the work that you chose to do in wellness.
I am receiving that.
Yeah.
And actually, when I was emailing you before this, I actually have one of the emails saved that you sent back to me in my warm fuzzies folder, because sometimes I need those reminders of like, oh yeah, I'm not putting stuff out into the void. There are actually people who are reading this and are impacted by it. So thank you for that encouragement.
Oh, you're welcome. I think it's so important too. I love that you have a warm fuzzies folder, immediately making a mental note to do the same. But I think that this heart work, this soul work that we get into in the realm of wellness and well-being and helping folks find a means of living in a more qualitative way and in their lives, I think is can be a little lonely at times, in the sense that the bigger, louder voice is telling people to buy and change and do and hustle. And to take an opposing point of view and really kind of commit and claim that space in terms of leadership is just, it's hard. And so it counts when people say you're doing a great job. And I wonder, did you have any inclination of what it would be like in the beginning of following this little brain gem that you had as you were transitioning out of your achievement focused life? I had a quote that said, achievement worked until it didn't. And I resonate with that. I wonder if you can tell us about that transition and all that came with it.
Yeah. So to answer the first part of your question, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I think I knew that something wasn't working in my life as it related to self-care and inner work and alignment. And I was committed to trying to find something different and perhaps more effective. And what really happened is that as I shared, other people said, hey, me too. I'm having a similar struggle as well. And what has been an unexpected gift of doing this work, I mean, the first line of my book is, this is not an aspirational wellness book. It can't be, because I'm writing it. And I feel that so wholeheartedly. And so in doing this work, I am constantly reminded of these basics, these fundamentals, to have a life where that is like as full and as rich and as satisfying as possible and sustainable. I would definitely add sustainable in there too. So yeah. I had no idea what I was getting into. The idea visited me and I said, sure, let's follow it.
Did that drive or desire for satisfaction and sustainability, did that create conflict with your ambition?
I think it did. It still does create conflict with my ambition. But what I find, like when I think, I even was thinking about this now, we're recording this about a week before my birthday. And so I've been doing so much like reflection on the past year and what I want for the next year. And when I think about like the most satisfying moments in my life, they have nothing to do with big achievements. Like it is really great that you, like before this, you held up the book and I was like, oh yeah, I wrote something that people are experiencing and implementing. That is amazing. But like my most cherished moments of the last year were walking my dog to the lake. And like before we started recording, I was editing something and my dog was sitting in my lap, and like funny moments with my husband and vulnerable moments with my friends. And ambition doesn't give me those types of satisfying moments. And I think what's started to adjust is that my ambition is less that I have like the most achievements and the biggest company, and more that I feel satisfied in my day-to-day, and that I, through my work that I get to do in my day-to-day, create opportunities for other people to be well and to be fulfilled. I've been really digging into like the research around well-being and even how it's defined in research. And the definition that I like most is that well-being is feeling good, feeling fulfilled, and functioning well. And like those are the things that I want for myself. And I want to create things that support other people in feeling good, feeling fulfilled, and functioning well as well.
Yeah. And it's like a lot of times in the online coaching leadership space, you hear about modeling, but those things are very hard to model on a surface level if your business isn't set up in such a way and your life isn't set up in such a way where they're at the top of the priority list, where you can vet certain aspects of what you're doing each day against, like, is this actually helping me to function well, or is it knocking me out of my game? I secretly hope, like, lately there's always these trending terms that come up, and especially I'm so in the movement world that we love to obsess and fixate on one part of the body. So 1 year it's feet, 1 year it's fascia, and currently it's somatic, whatever that means to people. And if you've studied somatics in any level of depth, you understand that there's a richness to it, that there's a patience to it, that there's a slowness to it, that there's a process to it. And I see a lot of people kind of stamping that label on what last year was a high intensity interval training class and calling it somatic and saying that it's changing life. And, like, I never want to judge anybody's experience, but where I'm going with this is that well-being feels right now like such a kind of sacred space for those of us who are looking towards a different definition than wellness, which is often identified as without illness or just like optimal health, which is laden with all sorts of different, details to it. But the well-being feels like we need to protect it in a way as something that's really rich and sacred, for lack of a better word. Yeah. How do you feel about that? Protecting versus... I
agree. It's like, I think the protective part of me is like, I don't want people to come in and do what they did to self-care or to wellness or these things that really quickly adapted other frameworks and other structures that can be oppressive and just copy pasted them into these spaces. And well-being's, to your point, feels like, by definition, it is so focused on the person and their singular experience and finding what works well for them and what feels good for them. And so it's like, I want to protect it from the powers that be that want to commodify everything. And also I want to share it with all of the individuals and be like, here, you take your piece of well-being and you hold it and protect it for yourself.
Yeah, we want to make it big enough for everybody to enjoy, but not so big that it gets co-opted into some other situation that has nothing to do with folks. One of the things that I've been so interested to talk to you about is kind of along the same lines is the individualism versus community. And I know in the book you speak to the fact that lots of self-care and wellness is focused on extreme individualism. And I agree. And I always have this kind of ongoing conversation with myself in terms of chicken and egg. And like, what comes first, one's individual wellness or one learning well-being as a part of a community? And what if the community is dysfunctional, or what if the way they go about well-being? I mean, I go down the rabbit holes of all of these things because I feel very strongly that empathy is born from a place of kind of self-knowing and that like emotional bandwidth to step outside of yourself for a moment, but there has to be some sort of foundation to start from. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about individualism and community, not versus, but and what you feel is important in those two contexts.
I love that question. And I'll be honest, I, to a fault, am very independent, very individualistic.
I know.
And that's why I think about this a lot, because I see the ways that it has been so limiting to me. I'm also really mindful of, I mean, this is just like such a heavy time in our world right now. And I've seen a lot of people talk about being wary of solutions that tell us to be too individualistic in a time where we do need community. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I have a perfect answer. What I can say is that when I do work on myself, when I am able to better regulate my nervous system, when I am better able to understand the fears around asking for help or how to navigate conflict, that allows me to be in community better. That allows me to state my needs and to say what I need. It allows me to notice what other people might need and be better able to offer. So for me, that grounding and connection to self helps me be in community with other people because I've decided that being in community is important to me. So I worry if we go straight into being in community. I'm also I'm on the board of a nonprofit that talks all about emotional intelligence. And it's especially in a context like this where we're talking about the workplace, like emotional intelligence is one of the key factors that will determine the success of your career. Mm-hmm. And emotional intelligence kind of starts with you, and then you're applying those skills to how you relate to other people. So I think it's definitely a yes and. You need to do some work on yourself, and you can't navel gaze because you can just keep being curious about yourself forever. You have to see community as a priority and know that you're doing this partially for yourself and partly to be better in relationship with the people that you care about.
Mm-hmm. It goes back. I'm going through my my lots of Post-its in your book into the chapter 8, bliss, experiencing care through connection, and the connections tethering to self and other and community. And I think that again, in the maybe the wellness model or the ideal model, sometimes we think, okay, well, I've got to spend, X amount of hours with myself, and then I've got to make sure that I get some community time in. So I'm going to schedule that in, and then I'm going to, I'm going to listen to a podcast on empathy, and then I'm going to practice empathies on Thursday, and it becomes kind of an agenda to fill. But I love that there is a sense of invitation and also awareness surrounding the mutual benefit, like you're saying, about when I care for myself, I'm better equipped to be in community and to be an effective or contributing member of that community. And when I pay attention to the community, I might in turn learn something or receive from my own well-being. When you work with corporate culture, how does this paradigm come into play, and what are some of the obstacles that you face in addressing the two arenas?
I think it depends. And it's so interesting because for the most part, so there are times where I'll work with organizations where I'm doing like purely inner workout stuff related to mindfulness and leadership. And then there's also time where I'm working with organizations through other organizations. I work with Google, I work with Franklin Covey. And in those places, I'm not explicitly wearing my like wellness practitioner hat. And yet I see those things come up all the time. I see it and it depends on which level. So with individual contributors who don't have any direct reports, who are having to do a lot of influencing, who are having to do a lot of managing other people's expectations, but not managing other people, I tend to start a lot with more of the individual things, even if it's in like a one-on-one coaching session. What is within your control? And if something is not in your control, what can you name in terms of support that you need, and how can you effectively communicate that? I think the higher up you start to go is you start to think about leaders. It's reminding people that you feel like a normal person, and the words that you choose, or the time that you decide to send the email, or the opinion you hear versus the opinion you kind of ignore, all of those things can help or hinder other people's well-being. And so leadership is like such a responsibility for a lot of reasons. And I think people forget that we spend most of our time at work. And so our leaders can have an outsized impact on our well-being. And it's not just them saying like, oh yeah, you can take a yoga class over lunch hour. It's really those interactions. So the conversation around well-being for leaders gets a little bit deeper because I really want them to be reminded the impact that they can have. And then the last thing that I'll say is that with everyone, there's so much work around mindset, like around, do I deserve to be here, and how that gets in the way of them doing what needs to be done, or I don't want to be a burden, or I don't want to be seen as incompetent, or all of these different things that get in the way of them being the most effective at their jobs. So that was a lot, but that's kind of like my sample platter of what I see.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. I mean, it feels like you and I are doing similar work in different spaces, and something that I've been really touching on in corporate spaces lately is psychological safety, and the ownership is the way that I'm phrasing it, amidst both leaders and employees, in the sense of we don't want to influence either side to be overly responsible or even burdened with everyone's safety. However, we want leadership to be in a space where they are grounded enough to communicate the ways in which grievances are aired, or things are challenged or critiqued, or feedback is received. And we want employees to feel empowered enough to ask about these policies and to be educated on where they are and how they exist, so that there is a channel of communication to go back and forth. And I think with the emotional intelligence piece, it's like it's brushed off as such a soft skill, right? And yet it can be the lightning bolt that brings home a team to following through on an execution of a project. I think it's so important. What do you feel like is I know there's so much to it, but what's the through line of emotional intelligence when you speak about it with your folks?
That's interesting. I will say I don't do a lot of emotional intelligence training explicitly. That is like we are talking about emotional intelligence. And yet, if you look at like the skill sets of emotional intelligence, we are speaking to those skills through different things that I get to lead. I think I personally, and this is also just where I'm at with some like personal life things that have happened in the past week. I have been thinking a lot about deep listening, active listening, but also really direct, clear, care-filled communication. I I see a lot of people thinking that they're being diplomatic or being kind and end up being like passive aggressive or confusing. And it slows everyone down and leaves a lot of opportunity for guessing. And our human brain does not tend to, when we have an opportunity to guess, we're not really guessing the best case scenario. We're guessing the worst case scenario. So I think that's a skill related to emotional intelligence that's been top of mind for me. And it's something that I've been talking about both personally and professionally in various contexts over the past month or so.
Mm-hmm. How is it for you in terms of direct communication? Like, is it easy? Is it challenging?
It depends on the context. I think for me, it's a lot like when there's been trust, I can almost be too direct and I'm like, whoo, reel it in, Taylor.
Yeah.
But when I don't feel there's as much trust, I can be the person who is couching things, who is implying something rather than explicitly stating it. It's something that I continue to work on. And I find that like when I can just be so much clearer, things get done. So like,
yeah,
everyone seems to have a better experience. And there might be a little friction because we're not always used to speaking directly. So it might be like, ooh, she actually asked me for what she needed. Or she actually said, like, gave really direct feedback, but it's not unkind feedback. And it's really helpful. So it's a struggle for me, but like all of this work, I talk about these things and I'm mindful of these things because I know that they don't necessarily come naturally to me. And I know that the more that I implement them, the more I enjoy my life in my work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible. Like, it's the sense of liberation, I think, when you can actually say what you need. There's another side of that, which is whether or not the person is able to hear you, which is, part of the gray area of clear communication. But I do think that sometimes when you're able to communicate your needs or communicate a direct boundary, even, that hearing yourself say those words can be the difference between being okay, quote unquote, okay with whatever comes next, or, kind of going into a spiral of sorts or falling out of it. Yeah. I would love to talk a little bit more about your company, Inner Workout, and it's multifaceted, which I feel like for me as a wellness professional and hopefully others listening, I feel like it brings such permission to the table in a world that constantly asks people to niche or stick with one thing. There's a lot in the ecosystem of Inner Workout that you offer. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about core values and some of the services, maybe some of your favorites, some of the things that pays the bills. Maybe they're the same.
Absolutely. I'm pulling up so that I can speak. I actually did a lot of, so Inner Workout has been around publicly for about 4 years now. And over the summer, which was actually like the 4-year anniversary of starting to work on Inner Workout behind the scenes, I did like a rebrand, not just a visual rebrand, but also like, who are we now? What are our values? What exactly do we offer? I will say we publicly launched 6 months before the pandemic, and the original vision for Inner Workout was something that involved a lot of in-person events.
Sure.
And so we've been pivoting almost since day one. That's also part of my nature, is to pivot. I learn by doing, like making experiments, realizing what works and what doesn't, and then trying again. And so I love that you said that there's like kind of some permission or some possibility in that, because it's a shadow for me. I will sometimes feel so bad about like, why didn't I just figure it out from day one? But the more that I own that part and integrate that part of myself, I get comments like what you just said. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do to show other people that it is possible to try and to then try something else, and also to have multiple things within a business.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, Inner Workout's mission is to make well-being easier. And the main way that we do that, we're recording in November. Hopefully in January, we'll be launching the Inner Workout app. So that's really going to be the main thing that we'll be offering to people and to the world, direct to consumer. So the app takes a lot of the learnings from the past 4 years and puts it in a place that is more accessible from a price point, more sustainable for me and for the people that I get to collaborate with. And the idea behind the app is that you can practice self-care in a way that fits your schedule. So everything on the app is designed to be completed in 10 minutes or less, whether that is a guided meditation or journaling prompts for different parts of your day, or these mini courses called journeys that speak to really specific skills that map to different dimensions and subdimensions of well-being. And then the other side of the app is to help people make more time for self-care by being able to lock yourself out of distracting apps. So you can use it to lock yourself out of Instagram or TikTok or email or whatever might take you out of the present moment.
I love that. Yeah.
That's the app. I'll pause there and then I can speak to some of the other parts of Inner Workout.
Yeah, I think, well, I would love for you to speak more to the other parts because I have a question that will take us down a different direction, which I will ask once we talk a little bit more. I just got your email about the journeys and there's just a sigh of relief when you read something that makes sense. So I was like, yeah, journeys, not course, not challenge, not workshop, journey. This is great.
Yeah. And it's been such a delight working on them. That's actually what I was working on before I logged onto our call is a mini course that's all about like meeting your brave me. So some of it is expanding on stuff from the book. Some of it is stuff that used to be its own course or workshop. And now we've really made it bite-sized because that's what most of us can handle right now. We have a lot going on. So outside of the app, the other thing that we offer is work with organizations, whether that is leading workshops, doing keynote speaking. I haven't had this yet, but it's something that I would love to do is having coaching packages where people can work with the Take Care assessment and get one-on-one coaching through that. And that's been like a significant revenue driver for the company is getting to come into organizations and help people build skills, whether it's something for an employee resource group or whether it's working with leaders in the organization or partnering with nonprofits. There's a nonprofit that out of Texas that I've gotten to partner with that specifically does development work for principals, and I get to come and talk to them about mindfulness and how that can intersect with change management. So those are like the two main things that we sell. And then outside of that, I really try to create a lot of free resources, whether it's through our Self-Care Sunday newsletter or through the Inner Warm-Up podcast. I'm starting to do more blog content that is exciting. And so that's the Inner Workout universe.
So the question I wanted to ask earlier is, we've all seen the posts or sentiments that self-care is more than the bubble bath or the jade roller, etc. And I feel that often when I read general content, there isn't a lot beyond that sentiment. Maybe there's a statement of, it's about the way you feel about yourself, period. What I love about your work is that you've gone granular with all of the aspects and the different ways in which one can explore and develop a sense of well-being through multiple different modalities, whether it's mindfulness or movement or listening or journaling. What made you stay with the term self-care? And did you have any desire to create a new term, or was it really about rebranding what it was as known to like the general population?
You're just so insightful, Jenna. I'm like, are you psychic? Because I've been having these questions. I just voice noted a friend a couple weeks ago where I felt like one of my main keynotes that I've been doing since 2019 was like redefining self-care. I've really been doing that for so long. And to a small extent, I feel like I've done that, where I've had like, there's another book that quotes my definition of self-care, and I'm like, oh, I guess we're doing something here. And also, I do feel like that will continue to be a term that gets muddled. Like there's research around self-care that could be talking about things that are really basic, like can I care for this wound at home versus what I'm talking about, which is not quite the same. I've been thinking, do I lean in more to well-being? And then I've also realized like I do have a term that I created, inner workout. And so I'm thinking, how do we expand more of that terminology in the future? So I don't think I have a perfect answer. I think I started with self-care because it made sense and people were understanding what I was saying. And the deeper that I get into it, and as I start to like pull out what exactly is self-care and what exactly is well-being and how do all of these pieces fit together, which I believe that they do, I've wondered if there is a term that I need to lean into and create. And then that's when I was like, oh, well, I already created inner workout. And that's really a lot of what we do, like especially on the app. It is creating these bite-sized things that you can do to create well-being in your life. So
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned for the evolution. It feels very clear if one were to say, I'm going to do my inner workout. That feels like it's crystal clear, pinpoint, you know, as opposed to trying to make their way through the weeds of my self-care. I have a kind of what would you call metric, I suppose, when I speak to people out in the world who don't do the work that we do. And I ask them about their movement practice or meditation if it's applicable. And I always know that when they answer with a brand first that doesn't have like, I guess I'm going to go deep into my English. Like maybe, is it a possessive pronoun? Like if someone were to say, I do my Peloton, that would be a different sense of like ownership and experience. Or one would say, I would do my inner workout. I would understand that that person has made it their own. It kind of absorbed it into their life design. But if they say, I do insert brand name here, then I see that as more the practice is still surface level. Maybe they haven't integrated it into something that's resonant with their life, but somehow they know that they're doing it, whether it's to keep up with the Joneses or just, you know, or just to do something at all. And I wonder, where are the entry points within inner workout that just guide someone to claim it as their own practice?
Hopefully all of it.
All of them.
That's really my goal is like, I want this to be, you hear something and you integrate it and apply it for yourself. What I've found, honestly, through doing a lot of this work is that for me, I naturally hear something and I'm like, okay, how does this apply to me? And how can I tweak this? And that's not everyone's natural inclination. And so I've had to learn to be maybe a little bit more prescriptive than I would like to be, because that's what allows me to meet people where they're at. And I think a good example of that is the take care assessment. Like It's something that you can take. The way that the questions go, it really does. The way that the questions go, it allows you to be reflective, but maybe it feels a little bit more accessible because you're like, well, I'm asking myself these questions to then get this PDF that's going to give me some things to work on, but it's already starting that reflective process. And then the practices that you get based on your results, most of them are reflective practices that get you talking to yourself. So I think that's a pretty accessible way to start talking to yourself and having some tangible things that you can do.
Yeah, I find that people are so interested in themselves when it comes to aspects like quizzes or assessments, that especially if they have a little gifty at the end of it. And yet sometimes like just the basic act of self-inquiry seems so far away that I feel that especially the assessment kind of bridges the gap for people to maybe take that first step into self-inquiry, which is beautiful.
Yeah, it's been so interesting because in building the app, I'm a big person who believes a lot in customer discovery and talking to your customer as much as possible in as many ways as possible. And so I did a lot of interviews with folks. And one of the things that came up when we were looking at the initial designs of the app is that for me, like having an open-ended journaling prompt, for example, is great. And for a lot of people, they were like, oh, I need like some starters for this to really help me hone it in. And so I've just been reminded that like a term that we'll use, I guess this would come up in fitness too. It comes up in education and in fitness, is like kind of scaffolding. Like how do you develop this muscle so then they'll be able to do this thing? And I'm realizing there needs to be a lot of scaffolding in inner work and in inner workouts to help people build confidence. We can't just throw people into, here's a blank journaling page, write whatever you want about how you feel. That's overwhelming to people, many people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to switch gears for a moment into kind of the mindset of entrepreneurship. We've talked a little bit about, the challenges that happen with businesses opening at any point in time over the last 4 years. Something that you wrote in some of our preliminary questions had to do with understanding marketing and the efforts that go into it, and being mindful to be authentic, but also to not let the effort to have messaging and marketing out in the world detract from your own well-being. And I just would love to hear you speak about that in a world that's asking us to post multiple times a day, and the blogs and the podcasts and the workshops and all of the things, and then, do it double time and then put it in AI and have 25 other pieces of content and all the things. How do we integrate well-being into our marketing efforts in this saturated communication market right now?
This is something, I wrote this down because I've been thinking about this so much over the past 6 months. And I have to say, I owe some of this to my friend Amelia, who's also my business partner in another business we own together. She runs a podcast called Off the Grid, where she talks about running a business without social media. And I'm still on social media to a certain extent. So is Inner Workout. And also I realized maybe, was it October of last year or 2021, where I started to realize like the efforts that we were putting into social media at that time. I was paying a social media manager. We just weren't getting the same ROI out of it. Yeah. And there are these things that it's like you're supposed to do if you're a business. And I just have really had to go inwards and be like, okay, who is my audience? Just the basic stuff. Where does my audience tell me that they like to hang out? And I actually just had this recently because I was like, okay, multiple people in my interviews said that they were on YouTube. So now I need to start a YouTube channel and I need to have a whole YouTube strategy. And actually, the number one thing that people said in interviews is that they like to read. And I was like, oh, that's so easy. I can just write more blog posts. Like that is a thing that I can do that feels sustainable for me. And so I've been looking at what feels good for me. Where do I know people like to show up, and how can I know what they want? So whether it is YouTube or TikTok or Pinterest or like SEO, thinking about Google search engine optimization, all of those things, you can see what people are searching for. And so I can find the intersection of what people are searching for and what I like to talk about. And I realized I need to do things from a really grounded place. I had maybe 3 or 4 months where I was on TikTok and I was doing decently well, but it just felt so frantic all of the time and I didn't like that energy. And so I'm like, if I wrote a blog post about something and I really like formulated an opinion, then I could turn that to some videos and that comes from a grounded place. But before it was just kind of like, this thing is trending. This is blah, 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 blah. Someone commented this, so I'm going to make a video. And it just was so overwhelming.
Yeah.
The other piece that I've just been honest about is like marketing is also a numbers game. So I just did some math of, okay, especially with something like an app that is more tangible than some of the abstract, not that coaching is abstract, but is a lower price. The math and the economics of it is just a little bit easier for me to do in my brain. So I'm like, okay, how many subscribers do I want from the app? What do I think the conversion rate is? So that means that if I think it's we'll say 1% conversion rate, I need to get in front of X number of people. How can I get in front of X number of people? I can be on podcast. I love being on podcast and having conversations with people. I can do some ads. I have to see what my budget is for that. That's going to affect like whether I think I can get everyone through ads. I can do XYZ number of things, but I just like did the math of how many people I needed to get in front of and then how can I get in front of them in the most sustainable way. And if the math is not mathing, then I got to figure out, okay, how can I make my expectations more realistic?
Yeah.
Or how can I figure out a way to change the economics of my business so that I have more bandwidth to be able to get those people?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so useful. I can hear future listeners writing notes of what you just said. And I think it dawns on me to call back our earlier conversation about individualism versus community and community. I think that what I'm recognizing as I shift from a place of representing a larger method, which was Pilates for many, many years, into a place that more accurately encompasses the impact that I'd like to be a part of in the world and the skill sets that I have, I realized that it's highly dependent on making connections with people in a networking type way. What's your networking experience been like in Chicago, out of curiosity?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I just want to call back because what you just said is something I spoke to what I'm thinking about for the app because it is like a lower cost thing that needs to go mass market. And that's another issue that I see is so many people who are doing services that are sold to an organization or sold to an individual that are like a higher ticket thing. They want to market it like they would sell an app or like a glass or these different things. And what tends to work, like you said, is networking, which I used to be so allergic to that word. And I realized I've actually built like a pretty good network. And I think part of it is just when I was like younger, I've always known that I wanted to be entrepreneurial. And so I did a lot of work of like meeting people around the city and was probably doing too many things, honestly. I used to be out like almost every night at some type of an event. And then COVID hit and I really leaned into my introversion and I'm trying to figure out how I get out a little bit more without being out every single night or every single day during the day going to something.
Yeah.
And part of how I've done that is be a lot choosier about the places where I go. So like, am I going because I've been directly invited by someone that I'm already in relationship with? Am I going because I am really interested in like what a speaker, for example, has to say? Like there are a lot of things that I've been to that in theory seem nice, but I can't speak. And I don't always like saying it this way, but it's true. Like, I'm not sure what the ROI is. Like, I would meet perfectly nice people or sometimes not nice people, honestly, at networking events, but I would meet nice or not so nice people, and we'll have maybe gotten some free food. But I'm at a place where like I have plenty of nice people in my life.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not going to learn something or I'm not going to make a connection for like a collaboration or an opportunity, then I just
Yeah.
don't go anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's kind of also, collectively relieving to hear as a extroverted, skilled introvert. you know, it's it's hard to walk into rooms, I think also at the age and stage where I'm at and realize there's going to be some hurdles to jump through beyond just having like an authentic conversation or a curiosity based conversation, and those are the ones that I've been kind of avoiding looking out for lately. Like, how many do I need to, sign my name in whatever, or like buy access to a club to be in this room? Are there interesting people who are going to kind of maybe challenge some of the ways that I'm doing business or thinking about it in a way that can help me grow? I think being discerning is probably the best way forward, especially for interesting connections. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's move into our quick fire round, which is never really quick fire, but I'm always interested in current strategies, tips, even products, if they're applicable, for the many areas of our own well-being. And in this case, we're going to include business since we're talking about wellness businesses. So my question to start is, what is working well for your brain support right now?
I love FocusMate. It's a tool that you can use. It's freemium, but the like premium price is only $5 a month. And so you work with someone virtually. At the beginning, you say what you're going to work on, and then you can do 25, 50, or 75-minute sessions, and you just like heads down are doing that. And then at the end, you say like whether or not you got done what it is that you set out to get done. And something about the accountability of that, it just works so well for me. And I've started to think, even as I'm mapping out my task for the day or the week, like I want to spend 2 75-minute focus mates on this project. And that has become like a metric for a metric of how I'm measuring work. So that's been working really, really well for my brain.
Awesome. I love that. Okay. How about your body?
I started taking dance classes again. So I take ballet on Tuesday nights and modern on Saturdays. And man, it just feels so good. And it's interesting. I danced from about 5th grade to 10th grade. So I started when I was little, and then I took a long break, and then I started again seriously in 5th grade and went on point and all these different things. And I did a couple of dance classes in college, but it's been a while since I've had a consistent dance practice. And I love my teacher, and it just feels so fun to have these things that I didn't even remember that I knew how to do, and also have to acknowledge, like, and my body can't do everything I used to do anymore. And it's different, but it just brings me so much joy.
I love that. I'll have to talk to you later. I'm rehabbing an injury, but I'd love to get back into a modern class. Sometimes I say to people, I'd love a bar and a waltz for ballet. I don't need any jumps. I'm kind of like dizzy with the turns. I just like to move lusciously across the floor. But yeah, what a beautiful way to explore and have fun too, right? Awesome. All right. I suppose that everything you're doing is affecting your being. And in the case of this podcast, being is kind of synonymous with spirituality or just, esoteric practices, creative practices, places where you lose time. So what's working well for your being right now?
Interestingly enough, doing projects around the house, I had a separate office. I just moved back. You're actually my first podcast interview that I've done from my home office. And I have been doing stuff around the house to make preparation for that. And I love like painting, or earlier this summer, I uninstalled and reinstalled our washer dryer, and some things like that you just have to be so present, but then I get to enjoy them. Like every time I look at our washer dryer, I'm like, I installed that. Or every time I look at our entryway or our bedroom that we painted, or we got new art for our living room, I get to see all the time. So it's like this presence in the moment, but then this payoff where I know that I brought this beauty into my home with my own two hands.
I love that. What's working well for your business right now?
I think a lot of what we've talked about so far, just really giving myself some time. And honestly, this was launched by me, by the book coming out and being like, okay, this was like a 3-year-long project. What do I want next? And how do I want to continue to bring this work into the world? And so I spent time this summer, like really digging into what I wanted as a business owner, short and long term, what the customer wants. And I just feel so much clearer in how we're doing everything. And it means I'm moving a little bit slower than I'm used to moving, honestly, which I don't think is a bad thing. But this like groundedness in human design, I don't know if you're familiar, but I'm a 1-3 generator. Okay. And so I think I've leaned a lot into the experimenter nature of that. Like I have to learn by doing, but then, and I think it's the one, is the part that's like really wanting to dive in and learn and feeling more confident in sharing once I've laid that foundation. And I feel like the book laid the foundation for a lot of the concepts where I'm like, I really believe in this body of work that I've built. And now I'm laying the business foundation. And not that I didn't have it before, but just being like, okay, what changed and what continues to go into our next phase? So that's working really well. And I'm continuing to do, like, I was thinking about this earlier today when I was mapping out what needed to get done this week. So much of it is how can I lay the foundations for myself and for the people that I work with so that everything can go smoothly next year, next 3 years, et cetera.
Yeah. Thinking it's almost taking care of your future self at present. Beautiful. For one last question, if there is an entrepreneur who is trying to forge a new path for wellness or well-being in general, or even for themselves, what piece of advice would you offer to them today?
I'm like, just one piece of advice. I will say one thing, and I think it applies in multiple ways. Have honest conversations. So first, that's an honest conversation with yourself about what do I actually want? And that could be as simple as like, do I even want to be in this business anymore? What works for me? What am I forcing myself to do because it is the thing that everyone's saying to do right now? And then have honest conversations with your people, whether that is like your customers or people on your email list, but really understanding what they want and what they need and how they feel that you can serve them or are serving them. And then look at the Venn diagram of those things and really lean into that center part of the Venn diagram, because in doing that, I just find like there are so many superfluous things that I was doing that you're probably doing right now that you can just let go of. Yeah. And that creates so much more spaciousness.
Beautiful. That was a robust piece of advice. Thank you so much for that. Well, Taylor, it's been, again, an honor, a privilege. I'm excited that you are going to be part of this first season of the show, and just so thrilled to talk to you. And I'm ready, willing, and able to support all of the future moves for Inner Workout and for your work. So just know that you are appreciated tenfold from my little studio to yours. And thank you for being here today. Thank you for being a part of this.
Thank you for having me. This was such a delight.